Another area of retrenchment in society was tied to race in the United States. Now, much of this is tied to that anti immigration and those attitudes towards non Americans or new Americans in the United States. But there's also a huge rise again in racism against black Americans. Some of this is occurring because, well, racism, right? But the things that changed that highlighted it and accelerated the racist actions in this time period were the realities that you have a lot of black American soldiers that are coming back from World War One, from military bases, back to their communities, wearing their soldiers' uniforms. And you have some whites who don't like that. And you have black soldiers who've gained new confidence and new power in their position, and they're standing up for themselves in a new way. So you have that tension. You also have these great migrations of the African American people in the United States, and we know this through census records, through newspaper accounts, through housing accounts. This idea that right after the American Civil War, you have this great migration out of the Deep South into the Mid South. With World War One and new industrial jobs, you have another migration, not as large as we'll see in World War Two, but it is another migration into some of those Midwestern and northern cities. So you see this movement of black Americans into new communities, into new jobs. And the response by some white Americans is not healthy for them. You see the rise in this time period of the KKK. This comes in one form because of the movie Birth of a Nation. D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation comes out in the 19 teens. Woodrow Wilson shows this film in the White House. This is a black and white silent film. It is incredibly racist. I don't show it in my classes anymore. You can find it online, but the images that it portrays are the standard storyline of, you know, black man accosting a white woman, and so the white men must rise up to defend her honor. And so where we had seen this KKK grow out of the post-Civil War era during Reconstruction, it had fallen apart. It had just gone away. Well, it comes back. It is portrayed in this film, and it kind of re-inspires racists to be a part of it. And so you see this growth of the KKK. You know, by 1923, you have over 3 million members. By 1924, you have over 4 million members of the KKK. And the thing about it in the 1920s, when it really gained some power, is while it is anti-black, and that's a core tenet of it, it is also anti-immigrant. And that becomes a really important part of this new KKK of the 1920s, is this anti-immigrant sentiment. They're anti-Jew, they are anti-Catholic. So, you know, anything or anyone who is not white Protestant is a target for the KKK in this time period. And there is a lot of violence associated with these groups. Lynchings across the United States go back up in the late 19 teens and in the 1920s. And again, most of the lynchings are against black Americans. But many of the lynchings are against other minorities, Italians, Jews, Catholics, and different groups of that nature. So this idea of racial violence by white Americans is going to grow in the 1920s. We'll see it decline in later decades, and then of course it has grown again in its violence in recent years, sadly. The violence in the early 19 teens, especially the year 1919, but you have violence across much of the United States. They're called race riots, but they're not really race riots. They're white violence against different minorities in those communities. You think of Tulsa, which I have some readings and links to the massacre in Tulsa in 1921, which was just the complete destruction of the Greenwood District, or Black Wall Street, it was known as, in Tulsa, uh, simply because they resented the success of it. It was a thriving community, middle class, bankers and businesses, and all sorts of things, and they just burned it to the ground for no reason other than it was a black community, and was no retribution, no payment for it. And again, I've got some links in our module for Tulsa, but there were other communities. There was Rosewood, Florida. There were this idea of violence against black Americans in the 1920s with no retribution at all was prominent, and it's something to keep in mind, that the violence that we're seeing is not new today, but it does end because people stand up and make it end. So keep in mind that this kind of dark side of the 1920s, this retrenchment in society in so many ways, this anti-immigrant, anti-black in many ways, movements and pro-business, anti-progressivism, right? This backlash against the movements of progressivism were really very prominent at the time. So I do hope that you'll read more about some of these things. Again, I've got links there in our module that I hope that you will look at and be curious and learn more about it.